I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to share with you some thoughts having to do with the theme, 7 Trends That Will Transform Local Government Through Technology. It's really a journey, and I'm going to start with setting the stage. I always do this, and it's still kind of the beginning of the year, even though very few of us are still saying Happy New Year. It is still within the first quarter, and there's a lot of trends that are occurring, and I thought in setting the stage for these 7 trends, it might be helpful to kind of go over some of these. What we're seeing, and when I use the word out and in, I mean, this is what you see in magazines, and I'm basically following kind of a populist approach as to how these things relate to each other. I mean, clearly there's a trend in the CIO position, and we're going to come back to this in one of the trends. And when I use the term CIO, that title is kind of interesting in the sense that it's intertwined between Chief Information Officer, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Knowledge Officer. We're using that in the terms of this conversation for this webcast to denote who is the top technology leader within an organization. For some of the smaller jurisdictions, it could be the city manager who plays this role, or the ACM, the assistant city manager. So it's just our way of saying that. But clearly there's a shift between the traditional CIO as the Chief Information Officer, and with all the stuff going on, which we're going to share and talk about, to maybe Chief Innovation Officer. Now, there's some other things when we come to cloud computing. Some people think this could evolve to the Chief Infrastructure Officer. So, again, a real shift is occurring in that top position. When we say out is e-government, in m-government, to many in this country, m-government is kind of a relatively new term. And it is, perhaps. E-government, as we know, was basically created with the recognition that we needed to tie all these different pieces together internally within government at all levels, including state and federal. So e-government really was something that was an internal operation first, and it was a series of different kind of technologies that began to become linked together as the Internet proved to be a relatively stable way of sharing information among various departments and then finding internal applications. As more of the public, became more involved and started, getting their own systems, their own browsers, suddenly e-government started an outward-facing kind of endeavor. And so now it's commonplace that most cities and counties have their own websites, and you'll see much more than that. But m-government is where government now is looking at how do we develop apps to follow where our citizens are and what devices they're using. So that is a real shift. It's not replacing one really, but it's morphing into, again, to change the device. We know that software as a service is becoming much more popular as opposed to custom software applications. We know that virtual reality it will always be around to some extent, but augmented reality really sits on top of virtual reality, and there's some really cool things happening, especially in the browsing community with mobile devices, especially for those who have gravitated to the smaller mobile devices, such as the iPad or the Android devices. The iPhone, I say, is out, not really, but I certainly raised the bar. Certainly the Android operating system is moving very nicely, very rapidly into the mainstream, with many more manufacturers obviously developing systems on that platform. Netbooks, which was all the rage just a couple of years ago, has been replaced by tablets by and large. I would say that if I had put something else in here, I think PCs will be out and Ultra notebooks will be in. We know that GSM and CDMA, and I would add to that WiMAX, is kind of going out to be replaced by various forms of LTE. Power through owning is being replaced by power through sharing. Proprietary stuff is being replaced by open source. Government-owned data centers replaced by more cloud computing applications. And this one is more wordplay, but it's important. Outdated emergency plans being replaced by energy assurance plans. What we're thinking here is that when I talk to people, it's always about DR, disaster recovery or COOP. That has been well covered, and many people think that their bases are covered with among those two kind of plans, assuming that they have even been practiced. What we're finding, which is somewhat interesting, is that there has been a lack of emphasis on what happens when the power goes out. So energy assurance is a term that was basically created by the U.S. Department of Energy, And, I'm not happy with that term, but it does state what it is, and that is to assure continuity of operations when it comes to energy. And our society's become so incredibly dependent on power as never before. And so we'll talk more about that in the 7 trends. So more of a focus on keeping the power going and what are the plans when the power does go out. And then websites information being replaced by mobile apps for information, proprietary being replaced by consumerization, bring your own bottle out, bring your own device in. We might even add to that for fun the idea, the big picture, the power through owning private information and keeping it secret, being replaced by power through transparency and sharing information. That's a relatively new trend, and it'll be interesting to note where the movement has been coming from. And basically, you may be surprised, it's not the public. It is actually the government. So let us begin. First of all, I guess I'm giving you the contents of a book that will be out next month. I had hoped to have it out by the time of this broadcast, but there are some minor revisions occurring and some new cartoons and illustrations. It will be a fun read, but it will be out. It will be available at Amazon.com. And this is a project I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years. And I was so excited, I made the mistake of having the cover designed 2 years ago. And so I could easily have morphed this presentation into the 9 trends, the 12 trends, but because I already invested in a nice cover, I kept it at 7. But I've rearranged them. So anybody who's heard this talk before, say 2 years ago or even a year ago, those 7 categories have changed dramatically. So this, by and large, is new stuff. The first of the 7 trends is all about rethinking technology. This chapter takes the most space. And this is when we step back and say, okay, we've been doing things the way we've been doing things. We've been building upon the success of technology in past years. And we need to really step back and rethink things as never before. When we look at the surveys that are out there, there's still projections of flat to decreases in spending, and we're talking about IT spending in particular. We know there's by far less discretionary funds. We know, and that includes staff and resources, and there's certainly an impact on staff and morale. We see this new concept of consumerization of IT. We are rethinking infrastructure because we have to. We see performance measurement and measurement tools becoming more critical than ever before. It's not that we ever thought that they weren't important. It was just that there was a time when there was money, which is hard to believe in today's environment, and we could basically rationalize things because it was a cool thing to have, and we could say it's going to save us money without really having any oversight or having somebody look over our shoulder and saying how and, more importantly, when. We have the human element that's something that I need to talk about in this little rethinking technology, because even with all the systems out here, they really depend upon good people to be there to make sure things are operating as they should. And then the idea of green. I was trying to think, where does that really belong? But when we think about rethinking technology, certainly green has a big role to play. So with that, let's move ahead and talk about this consumerization of technology, this idea of what I call coming to terms. When we look at this, this is one of the newer kind of observations that I've seen. And all this stuff that I'm basically talking about, these 7 trends, the most amazing part, I would say, is the fact that it's occurred within the last 12 years. 12 years. So, we have seen the most incredible change in just 12 years. Remember, the iPad did not happen until March of 2011, and now this coming March we're talking about the 3rd rendition, iPad 3. The iPad original didn't come out until 2007. And when we really turn the clock back and look at the turn of the century, which we were all witnesses of on this call, the turn of the century,